Now that we have a good idea of how everything's going to work, all we need to do is set up some frames for our other content up here in the timeline. We've already got movie clips for our other sports animations, so let's go ahead and set things up. I like to keep things separated by layers, so I'm going to create another layer for our sports objects. And of course, we've got our golf, football, and basketball animations, so I'm going to go ahead and make layers for them as well. Now, let's not forget to name them all so we know where we put everything. We've got sports, our golf animation, our football, and basketball animations. Now, just to keep things neat, let's make a folder for all of our content. I'll just click on the folder button. We get a new folder right here. And I'll just name that something like content. And we can grab all of our animation layers and toss them right inside that folder. I think we want news, and I might go ahead and bring in the start page text as well, since that's content too. Now, all that really does is sets it up so that we can collapse this folder and work on other items and open it up when we need to. It's just a little bit better organization. Next, we can start bringing in those animations we've got over in the library. Let me click on the golf layer and we'll go grab that one first. All we have to do is select our golf animation and drag it right out into the active layer. We can position it wherever we want. But as you can see, we have a little problem with what used to be off stage, so we're going to have to fix that. In our earlier chapters, we saw how we could use one layer to mask another, and in this case, that would be a great feature to use to create a sort of stage boundary. What I'll do is set up a layer for the mask right above the golf layer, and we'll name that layer Golf Mask. Now, I just want a big rectangle that's going to act as a frame here, so let me just set up some settings. I don't really need any stroke around it, so I'm going to select the no stroke option, and I just want a normal solid color. In fact, bright pink would do, so that way we'll know exactly where our mask is. I don't really need any corner rounding for this, so I'm going to set our rectangle corner options to 0, and then I'm just going to draw a rectangle right here in the layer. Now, I'm not too worried about how big it is, because if I just use my normal selection tool, and we go over to our position and size properties, I can just modify the width and height to match the stage that the golf animation was originally on. That was 500 width and 300 height. Now we can just move this around to match the area that we'd like to mask out. I've snapped it right on top of our green background. So it's basically covering up the background perfectly. Last, we need to turn this into a mask, and if you remember the shortcut, it's through the right-click menu. If you don't have a right-click button, you can always hold down the Control key while you press. But down in this menu, we have the Fast Mask setting. Once we turn that on, it creates a mask out of our rectangle, masks the layer right underneath it, which is our golf animation, and of course it locks both layers so that we can see what the mask looks like. Now, if we want to work on anything, we would just need to unlock those two layers, and we can grab all the objects and move them if we need to. Lock them back up, and you can see your mask. Now that we've got our animation set up, we'll need to set up these two frames like we did our news layer before. Remember, our news starts up at the same point where we placed a keyframe with the news label. So I'm just going to grab these two frames. I'll click on the golf mask, and I'll shift-click on the golf keyframe in the first layer, and that will select both of them. And then we can just grab a hold of them and move them down the timeline past the news, let's say to probably about 50. Now I want a label right here at the top that says golf. So we need a keyframe. I'll select right in our labels layer. We can insert a keyframe either with our F6 keyboard shortcut or the menu item here. And I'll just set the label as golf. Let's set up the football and basketball ones next. I'll just click over in the football layer to activate it, go over to my library, and we'll drag out the football animation. Now, as you can see, these animations don't have any stage behind them. So I'm also going to have to think about removing the animations when we want to finish our navigation. For now, let's just grab a hold of this by the goalposts here, and I'll move it down so it's sitting almost on the base of the frame. Now, what we need to do here is the same thing we did with our start page. We need to make sure it's removed from the screen. We can do that with the news page here. I can go to the same frame where my golf animation is, click on that frame for the news layer, and insert a blank keyframe. That'll remove it right out of the timeline. And now, of course, we need to get rid of the golf animation when the football one comes up. First, I'm going to need some more space here on the back end of our timeline. We can do that pretty quickly. I'm just going to go down to, let's say about frame 120. I'll click in the topmost frame and drag straight down, all the way down to the bottom layer. Once again, I've selected the entire column, and I can press F5 and insert frames. Now we can back up and see about that golf animation. First of all, I want to move the football keyframe down the line. I'll just click on it, and once it's selected, I can grab it and move it down to, let's say, frame 60. We'll add a football keyframe label at the top, F6 to insert a keyframe, and we'll name it football. And of course, we want to remove the golf animation. So I'll click on the frame in the golf mask layer and shift click on the frame in the golf layer and insert a blank keyframe. Now you can see how our navigation is going to work. When my user presses the news button, the playhead will move here and we'll see the news animation. Here the golf, and finally the football. Now you might have noticed that we didn't need to do any masking for the football animation, and that's because it's got a mask built in. Let's take a quick look at that. I'll go up to the library menu and I'll just double click on the football animation. That brings it up down here in the timeline. Let me center it up a little bit and we can see our football and the animation rolling through. Notice that I've got a mask frame included. Let me unhide that layer and you can see another big pink square, but this time I've dropped it inside the movie clip. That way we didn't have to hang on to it outside or work with it separately. And of course our movie clip comes pre-masked this way. Now the basketball animation has something similar. Let's take a look at it. In this case, we've actually got the basketball flying in, but if we move over a little bit just to take a look at it, you'll notice that at the beginning of the animation, here, let me zoom out a little bit, that'll help. At the beginning of the animation, it fades out. So we actually start off with a completely invisible movie clip. Now this is going to have a quick bounce right in the middle, and then of course our ball through the hoop. And we want to set that animation up so it's on the timeline just like the football and the golf ones. So let's go back to scene 1. I'll click on the basketball layer to activate it, and we'll drag out our basketball animation. Now it's going to look a little funny because everything's invisible at the beginning, but this is where my basketball starts, and this is what we saw as the middle of the animation. So I'm going to drag this over and set it up so that the middle of the animation is about in the middle of the area that we're using to display the other ones. That should be probably good, and we can always adjust it a little bit later. It is a bit funny getting used to working with invisible objects, but you have to do it in Flash every once in a while. Now let's set up the keyframes for this. I'm going to slide the basketball keyframe down here towards the end. I'm really only leaving space in these areas so that we can read the labels. We could actually stack these up right on top of one another, but there wouldn't be room for any of the text in the labels. Now once again I want to remove the football animation, so I'm going to insert a blank keyframe down here in the football layer. And we're going to add a label layer for our basketball animation right up here at the top. F6 gives me a keyframe, and we can just type the label in here.